All right, good morning, Broadband Council members. It is 9:30. We can go ahead and get our sixth Broadband Council meeting started. If you are a council member, please go ahead and have your screen on. If you're not, if we could ask you perhaps to not have your screen on and then have your mic on mute. When there is time for the public comments, we'll be able to ask everybody to, opportunity will be given for the publics to chime in. So I wanted to welcome everyone to this meeting, and it's a continuation of the open working session in the development of the action plan. And we have had quite a bit of activity since last time we met. And I'm going to ask Jewel to go ahead and start with roll call of all the council member.
Good morning, Ms. Tong.
Here.
Designee for President Badger, Ms. Guzman Esteves.
Here.
Designee for Director Giarducci, Mr. Mallon.
Here.
Designee for Superintendent Thurman, Mr. Winkler.
Here.
Designee for Director Kim, Mr. Jameson.
Present.
Designee for Secretary Kim, Ms. Pepper.
Here.
Ms. McPeak.
Here.
Secretary Ross.
Present.
Designee for State Librarian Lucas, Ms. Neville Bonilla. Apologies, I always pronounce that incorrectly, Anne.
Here, thank you.
Ms. Snyder.
Here.
Designee for Senator Hueso, Ms. Smith. Designee for Assembly Member Gibson, Dr. Williams. We do have a quorum.
Thank you, Joel. All right. There are quite a bit of work, as I'm sure you all been aware of, and right before the meeting, and also to those that are joining from the public, please take a look at our website, as all of the work in progress document has been published. And the session continued to be an opportunity for the council member to work through the different input into the action plan, as well as the public to provide their input in this open process. The goal is, after today's meeting, before we have another official 7th Broadband Council meeting on November 18th, we are shooting for 80% completion by the November meeting, and then with the remaining 20% to be completed by the December, so that we can meet the goal of wrapping up this action plan by December 31st. In between now and the November meetings, you will hear from Stephanie that the staff have prepared and put placeholders on calendar as additional public meetings for the specific sessions. So for those council members working pairs like to obtain additional input from other council members, those sessions, it's at your discretion to invite additional council members to be expanding the working pairs concept to allow as many council members as you see appropriate to continue to provide that input to the respective sections. And I believe Stephanie is going to go into a little bit more of that. And before we go into the actual walking through of the action plan, just wanted to let you know that I did also ask the Chief Strategist of CDT, Justin Cohen-Shapiro, to also help us facilitate that editing and walking through. And but I wanted to turn it over to Stephanie Tom first to provide an update on the action plan development. Stephanie?
Sure. Thanks, Amy. Good morning, everyone. It's fantastic to see you. Happy Friday. First, let me thank you so much. Thank you to the council members, and thank you to the public and the audience for your collaboration, for your input these last few weeks. Since, of course, we launched this effort in August, and of course, we've had a couple council meetings, we've received phenomenal feedback. Just to provide a brief recap before we start the working session, we did execute our first round of listening sessions with the community, with, of course, local government, and with the providers. Collectively, we've received input from approximately 200 organizations and individuals, We've also received about a dozen, if not more, written public comment, which is listed on the action plan section of the California Broadband Council website. So we're actively collecting all of this feedback and information, and we're not only collecting it, we're actually analyzing it. We're taking a look at where it makes sense. We're really taking a look and looking at your feedback and making sure that, are these recommended actions? Is this something we should consider not only for the action plan, but moving forward? So know that when you provide feedback and input, when you participate in public comment, we're truly paying attention and we appreciate it. The second round of listening sessions is taking place next week on Thursday, October 29th. All of those sessions are being run on the same day, but of course the schedule for those sessions is on the California Broadband Council website as well. So please do take a look at that schedule and look to participate with us more. At that time, we will be focusing on the draft, which we have placed, of course, on the Broadband Council website as well. So you can take a look at that draft outline. We will be discussing that with the key audiences again, and then we'll be collaborating and aggregating your feedback. I also wanted to share that we continue to have one-on-one meetings with those that request it. So we appreciate you reaching out as well and want to make sure that your voice is heard as well. That's the update for the development of the action plan, and I'll turn it back over to Amy.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. Any questions from the council member to Stephanie on updates and the next steps? All right, seeing none. And I did see Sarah joining, so I just want Jules to acknowledge. We do have Sarah attending.
I have that down, thank you.
All right. Next, let's maybe again, before we jump into the going through the draft plan as it's developed right now, I just want to see if there's any open comment that the council members like to make before we go into a walkthrough of the plan. All right, seeing none. Justin, if I could ask you to pop up somewhere. There you are. Look at all these panel screens trying to find people. Justin, as you all have met from our meeting 2 months ago, he was the one that helped us facilitate a brainstorming session on how to put together the framework of the plan. And since then, he's continued to work with the team. And then today, we're very fortunate to have some of his time to help us to walk through the draft. And then we are going to focusing on section by section to talk through it. And then we could actually, I'm just talking this out loud, and if the council members like to have public input in each of the section, we could potentially insert the time in that to take some public comments, or we could walk through the entire plan with the council member, and then like we typically do with a public comment at the end. So I don't know if there's a preference one way or the other, or play by ear.
Amy, this is Karen Ross. I'm just wondering if we could try to work through the whole thing and leave public comment till the end. However, should there be a particular item where all of a sudden we see the chat box blowing up, it may be something we want to monitor in case people feel like this is an important place for us to stop right now and take some comments. Just a
Great
suggestion.
idea. Great idea. Let's do that. And yes, so thank you for flagging that. For those of you, if there's something really burning you want to jump in, we have a chat box, a chat function on the Zoom, and you can go ahead and provide that, and we're very flexible. Thank you, Secretary Ross. All right, Justin, are you ready to get going with this?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Before I share my screen and we begin going through the doc itself, I wanted to offer just a couple of quick framing comments before we distract you with the document itself. First is that obviously we received a lot of input over the course of the last month, both from the council members as well from the public, that we took and we've been integrating into an outline that reads with a common voice. This is intentionally a work in progress, and this is intentionally a draft. And so as we're thinking today about what the future of this outline is, there are three things I just want to draw to our attention so that we're making sure that we focus on them in the discussion. One is the overall story we're telling in terms of the broadband plan for the state of California. Two is that we have placeholders for the type of insights or data we would like to leverage in the storytelling. And we expect that there are better insights and better data that we might want to include. And so where you see places for that, I really want to encourage that those come up. And I would encourage our friends in the public as well to make suggestions. And then the third area is obviously we want this to be an action plan, which is driving towards some meaningful progress on broadband. And at the bottom of the document right now, there are some high-level suggestions that are in there, and they are intended not to be comprehensive at this point in time, but rather to help start the conversation within this group. We have received, in the orders of, at least I think we're in the several hundreds of ideas, some of which are overlapping across our stakeholder sessions, across our meetings, across the input that we've had from council members. And so we're obviously going to continue to work through those and prioritize those in the context of the action plan. But I do think that today in this public forum, it is an opportunity to talk about some of the actions that we want to be able to tee up that might build upon what's already there and bring up some additional issues. So with those three framing comments, let me pause just to see if there are any questions from the council members before we dive into the outline and the draft itself. All right, let me share my screen. Can everyone see the document? And is it large enough? I see Karen and Amy smiling, so that seems to be okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a couple minutes here just flowing through the document and voicing it over, and then I'm going to come back to the top and we can go section by section. I believe that's the current plan. And feel free to stop me anywhere just to clarify how we're talking about this. So at the beginning, we're going to have an executive summary, which really provides, think of this as the 1 to 2 page overview that sets up the problem, is really crisp about the actions we're taking and who's going to do what. We're going to build this out at the end once we have the rest of the content locked in. Second thing is we're going to add a little bit of an introduction to provide context behind where this action plan is coming from, including highlighting the impact and importance of broadband in modern life. Vision, this very much builds on conversations that we've already had as a group, and I imagine that this first sentence will get wordsmithed 1,000 times between now and when it is published. But the intent of a vision, which is high level and aspirational, about ensuring that all Californians have access, both at home and at work, to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet, devices, and skills training to ensure that there's equal ability to engage in the various aspects of digitally enabled life. Then there's a section which is currently a bit long, and we might have to cut down at some point, around where broadband is today, and highlighting a couple things. One is about some of the insufficiency of the standards today versus the lived reality of what people have required, especially over the course of the last 6 months. The second is some of the real data limitations that we have to help us make the right investment and policy-making decisions. And then we get into some of the elements that we have spent a lot of time talking about. So around where we are in terms of broadband access today, both in rural areas, in urban areas, and then jumping into adoption and talking about what the experience of adoption has been across certain demographic groups, as well as on the device side. We'll talk a bit about affordability, because obviously making sure that all Californians can access and use broadband high-speed internet, affordability is a big piece of the puzzle, especially when we're talking around equity in the state of California. And this obviously came up a lot in the context of COVID over the last several months. Reliability. Some of, reliability has obviously been at the forefront of our state, unfortunately, over the last several years when it has come to wildfires in particular. But this has also been true in the context of COVID-19 in the sort of the lived experience of some families, which is something that Commissioner Guzman-Aceves had mentioned in an earlier meeting around disconnections as well. Section on digital literacy and skills. And then we've got a couple of sections that just contextualize where we are today, both in terms of where, how California at this point in time invests in broadband and funds this work, as well as how we're organized as a state to address it, both from a regulatory aspect, thinking about the California Broadband Council, this body, but also the Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy and CDT, and asking the question of, given the way that we're organized today, are we set up correctly to be able to achieve on the aspirations that we want to? And then the last bits here are just contextualizing where we are in California against our peers. So this is our peers in terms of, states of similar sizes, which there are few, but also in terms of the places where people might want, people have talked about leaving California to go to. So like Arizona and Texas. As well as how we compare internationally, because the point is that California does not just compete and operate within the confines of the US. We very much have an international frame to the way that we operate in practice. Next section is around COVID-19 and the ways in which 2020 has exposed some of the challenges and inequities of the status quo. So this is both the vignettes of the individual constituents and residents of the state around families and schools and doctors, also about some of the inadequacies that have popped up. Either, ideally some of this will be real data as well as storytelling. And then also acknowledging the incredible work that the broader community has done to help meet this moment and come together to do this work. But also teeing up the fact that we have a lot more work to do over the future. And so there are a couple of, heading into the what we're going to do elements. One of the first pieces is about reconsidering broadband standards according to some guiding principles and informed by data. And I imagine that we'll have a robust conversation on this, so I will not go into too much detail at this point. But then also, heading towards our vision, really understanding where specifically we want to go in terms of things like, data access, adoption, affordability, reliability, and ideally having some sense of the baseline of where we are today versus where we want to be in some period, as well as the high level strategy which shapes the actions that we're going to take. And then there are a couple of sections that we have right now that help frame the actions. One is the cost, which is going to be informed by the CPUC modeling that that we'll leverage from the cost quest and the prep for RDOF. And then we've got a set of cross-cutting themes that will need to get built out. So including better data, thinking about the statewide governance, thinking about the right collaborations with local governments, and we've learned a lot about that in the context of some of our stakeholder listening sessions there, making the case for the incremental broadband investment that we're likely going to need to make, and then getting specific about 6 and 18-month actions that we want to take on delivering more access, on driving adoption, on driving affordability, boosting reliability, improving digital literacy and skills, and then at the very end, a implementation approach. So how we're going to monitor progress against this and how frequently we will revisit both the strategy, but then also the actions themselves. Obviously, if they're done within 18 months, we'll at a minimum have to do it within 18 months. But there's a question about the frequency of the revisiting. And so with that, happy to pause before we jump into sections with any questions or comments from the council members.
So Madam Chair, I just want to really commend Justin and Stephanie. They presented to the State Board of Food and Agriculture. There's a lot of work that's going on here, and this is a really big, ambitious project. But I think this is really thorough, and I appreciate all the comments that we've gotten and we're continuing to analyze, but I think this is a great frame for us to take a deep breath and plunge into.
Yes, it's a lot of great work. I probably should have done this. I don't know if we was mentioned. We actually have a writer. That I probably should have introduced her. Let me see. Is she here?
If you'd like, I'm happy to voice over both of those, Amy.
Yeah, I just want to make sure because we want to make sure I can't tell if there's so many screens on my top right now. Go ahead, Justin, if you see them on here.
Well, I would love, so obviously there's a lot of work that we're trying to do in a really short amount of time with a lot of very busy people to meet the moment on a critical issue for Californians. And so in recognizing that, we've brought in some help and in two places. One is on the technical side of things to help us with some of the technical research and the work on that side. And so we brought in a group of nationally known consultants, the CTC, to be able to help us and support in a light touch way over the coming months to ensure that we're both providing the right support to council members, but also making sure that this plan reflects the sort of the best and the greatest information that we do have at this moment in time. The second resource that we brought onto the team is a technical writer by the name of Sarah Hudson. Sarah comes to us formally from the U.S. Digital Service and New America Foundation and has experienced published writing on a variety of topics. And we're very grateful to have a writer on board with us because especially over the course of the next 4 weeks, but also, as we head into publishing, there's going to be a lot of version control and work that needs to get done to ensure that this is a polished, high quality document that reflects the state of California. And I want to thank Director Tong for providing the resources to help make that happen quickly and effectively.
And we did a lot of a car wash to raise funds so we can hire a writer to help with this.
I was going to say, what's the secret? But now I know. I just have to go wash some cars and do a few bake sales, right?
Exactly, Senator Russ.
And so I understand that Sarah's on and can come on camera to say hello as well. Sarah, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. As somebody who is currently in rural Texas and experiencing the day-to-day variabilities of having broadband or not, one of the reasons that, in fact, I often stay off video is because of this. So this is both a personal and professional interest of mine. A brief background, I started my government career at the City of New Orleans as a post-Katrina crisis responder and built out all of their crisis communications before going on and working as a technical writer and director of communications at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, ensuring that everybody has access to world-class care for children with cancer, regardless of ability to pay, and continuing on to the work at the Department of Justice with formerly incarcerated persons and with Native American women. And on every level, being able to both hear and respond to the actual lived experiences that folks are having in ways that ensure that we have both compelling stories, backed evidence, and real change is the way that I like to think about writing. And so I'm excited to be working with each of you all on this project.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, Justin, let's dive in.
Excellent. So why don't we start with the vision section? And obviously, we have writing pairs that were focused on particular sections. And so if we would like, maybe they can start. And obviously this is informed by, but not entirely, their work. And so we want to make sure that we give them an opportunity, but I also want to make sure that the entire council has an opportunity to provide input on these individual sections. And I'd say, obviously, I'm going to take notes as we go. There are going to be things that we want to include, but we're not going to agree on exact language right now. But as long as we can get to the spirit of what we're trying to get in each section, I think that'd be really helpful as a frame.
Yep. And then also to remind, vision is probably one of those that, like Justin says, is going to be wordsmithed 1,000 times. So today I'm going to time box this conversation a little bit so that we can move the other sections. And then knowing that every opportunity that we can, we're going to come back and refine that vision statement. So with that, I believe Sunny and Sarah, you two were the writing pair on this.
And I defer to Sarah.
So I don't know, I don't know how much I played in writing the specific statement other than trying to come up with something that's really high arching. I think this does encapsulate, everything that we discussed. So, I mean, as I said, it's meant to be very aspirational. So it's not obviously going to reflect all of the, details of the goals within each section. Which I expect to be elaborated by other sections.
Okay, maybe I'll ask it we can give it a minute for people to take a look at this vision statement. If there's anything strikes out to the council members, go ahead and provide suggestion. We'll go ahead and take notes on those edits, and then we can move on to the next section.
So this is Lori. I just have one comment, and I've been sitting here kind of hoping somebody else was going to speak up so I could think a little bit more about it. But in the second paragraph where it says access to high-speed internet service and digital literacy skills is foundational to economic opportunity, it seems like there's something missing, like economic opportunity, and then something about just daily living. And that's what I can't figure. I don't know what the word should be, but that's the concept that I think should be included.
So this is Sunny. Oftentimes we say quality of life and then add public safety. But again, we could be wordsmithing all day long. And Sarah took what really had been provided to the council by Commissioner Guzman-Esteves, and we went back to the concept for digital equity, and then crafted a version that I thought was just fine. And maybe and then the department, and maybe it's Sarah Hudson herself who's been now involved in this, but if we, because it is an evolved version of what Sarah Smith and I last saw. I think that the concepts, Lori, that do augment economic prosperity, because we talk a lot about the triple bottom line. So that's the other thing that is, I think, very much embedded in, for example, the Caltrans plan, the vision in transportation. It embraces what the governor has done around climate change, is that we need a prosperous economy, quality environment, and social equity. So that's another way to come at it, is to recognize the triple bottom line notion that broadband serves, or to add to this, in addition to economic competitiveness, economic prosperity, the concepts of quality of life and public safety. So those are sort of two different lenses to fill out a vision.
This is Anne. I would, I think there's a usefulness in as we go through, maybe it's just putting a pin in this idea. We know that broadband is critical for healthcare and for education, but we don't have it explicitly in here, right? And I think the question becomes, we finally are at the point where it is clear that broadband is, it is inextricably bound with every part of our life. So how do we call out those major segments, or do we leave it broad to say these, all of these things? How do we want to do that? So I just would say, let's put a pin in that, but I think we ought to decide, do we go, is it really broad and mention everything, or do we a broad statement that doesn't mention all the specifics?
And
Yeah,
Anne,
I would agree with Anne. And something, I mean, do we need to work in something like digital citizens, digital citizenship, or are we looking for something a little less detailed?
This is Sarah. Just my own personal perspective is to keep it really high level, just mostly because, to be honest, I think maybe depending on the age group of the person you ask, if you ask them what they need the internet for, if you were to ask somebody probably under the age of 40, they would say everything. It's not going to be limited to any one thing. They're going to say, yeah, for healthcare, for voting, for education, for work, for social life, for, name it. You're going to end up naming pretty much everything if you want to call out what the internet is essential for. And it's going to be, yes, there are certain things I think we recognize are essential needs. So I don't know if you want to think about it as, there's many essential services, education, healthcare, critical services, public safety, things like that, where you're going to use the internet for everything, but there's certain things where you have to monitor the availability and the access to it and encourage it very specifically, because the lack of internet access poses a threat to access to those other services.
Great.
This is Martha, and I had to log back in through my son's account so I could see all of you. But I was just kind of reflecting on the vision here of what we're trying to accomplish. And as I think one of the things that, and I saw somebody kind of allude to this in the chat, and maybe what Anne was getting at too, is do we have a vision that, that this is, and somebody in the chat used the word utility, but that we start to actually treat this service as a right, and therefore as a utility that everyone should have access to. And that if that is a vision, it's going to really drive some of what we're doing in our actions as obligations, and get us away from a couple of dynamics, which I don't know if it fits in the vision, but I'll just share now, which is we can't use incentives alone. We need obligations, and we need to come at the problem in a holistic way in terms of serving entire communities, and not just the school and the library and the hospital, and come at it with the vision of serving the entire community, because it is this necessity. And so if there's a way to really capture that in this vision that kind of really pulls the explicitness that we're in a new frontier now. This is no longer a privileged service. This is a need, and therefore a right that all members of our communities need. And that will, take us actually to some of our old measures that we used to have with voice service. Thank you.
All right, maybe one more minute on this, if any other council member want to chime in.
I'm curious what other council members think about Commissioner Esteves's frame as broadband access as a right.
So this is Karen Ross. I agree with Martha, as I always do, because that will drive the frame not only for what we have in existence as funding tools, but perhaps new opportunities for how we're organized to capture that. I come from a strong background of public power districts and rural electric cooperatives. And what we're missing in our state are some structures like that, because there's a lot of money going into those structures in every other state. I won't list the names of them the last 2 weeks in particular, but we really have to be holistic about not just the stream of dollars we have today, but some of the organizational structures that may help us tap into other pots of money.
I also agree with Martha. You know, beyond just treating it as a right, but also what you said about not just focusing on certain buildings like a school or a library, that it is for so many parts of our daily lives that it has to be a really a general purpose utility for, you know, if we're going to go in that direction.
Okay. All right.
One more comment on that. I think in general, I agree with all of that. I'd be interested to see how we're able to kind of layer this with what's going on at the federal level, because we're going to want to leverage resources if we're going to view it with that lens and not take on, sorry, I'm being putting my finance thinking hat on and not carry the full obligation for that. So I think, you know, that vision, I think, is where we should be headed, but we should also be thinking about how we can make sure that everybody's headed in that same direction.
Very good. And there's some good suggestion from the public on the chat too. Just so you know, we are capturing all those comments, so those will be additional input. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's with that, let's move to the next section.
Okay. So why don't we do each of these? So we're going to have several sections here, because what I suggest that we do is do them sort of one bucket at a time underneath broadband in California today. And so start with insufficient standards. And I'm going to do my best to keep this all on one screen. And this is not going to be perfect because this goes a little bit over. So I'm going to start up here and then scroll down slowly to make sure that everyone can see the bottom of it. Okay, well, let's open this up for discussion. I know in some ways, Brent and Sunny, this is the mirror of what we have later. And so if you want to start, please go ahead.
Brent is going to start.
Justin, can you scroll up just a little bit to the beginning? Was
Yeah.
an important part to start with. So, you know, this was fascinating in becoming better acquainted with both kind of federal and state standards. And clearly, I think you've done a really good job of in this context outlining kind of the problem. You know, we have a state standard right now of 6 down and 1 up. You know, we have a federal standard of 25 down, 3 up. A big, despite the disparity, the federal standard does also come with latency requirements that the state does not presently have. And then when you really consider both of those standards, whether it be federal or state, and you compare it to kind of what the needs of both in the, you know, business community, businesses, medical and communities, and you take a look at kind of just what the basic requirements are for a Zoom video, which I know we've all become you know, greatly acquainted with in the last 6 months, you start to realize that these standards, you know, are questionably adequate to our new needs. And so I think I'll kind of pause with that, but we definitely need to kind of rethink what, I think Sunny said it best when we were having our previous conversations, that the pandemic has brought, to stark reality the deficiencies even of where we do have, broadband, and how most households are just now finding out that they're not adequate to their daily needs when they're trying to do distance learning, and working from home at the same time. And I'm sure there are countless other scenarios. So I'll pause with that, but I like the way you've laid this out. Sunny, anything to add? Did I capture?
Oh, I think you did. Maybe we should just share that we did do a pretty extensive outreach again to school districts, county offices of education, and major healthcare providers in California to ask, what is it that you are observing is needed at home for speed and data allotments to support distance learning and telehealth as two very essential consumer applications today. I use the word application in terms of use at the home that should be performance driven. It will increase over time. Those needs do change depending on how many people are using what kind of technology at what point in time. So that performance standard as a benchmark for is it adequate is, I think we would say, is actually pretty important to keep in this concept. All technologies as we use them today, know them today, require middle mile that is fiber as backhaul. The school districts have reported higher speed needs for their students in distance learning now as the new school year began than when we last previously had surveyed them in 2020. Moving towards the need for more symmetrical systems. The healthcare plans actually have reported a need for somewhat slower amounts, which I think is just a reflection of the catch-up that's going on in the healthcare field, and particularly the reluctance of many low-income households to do video calls. There's actually a real emphasis in the healthcare industry to move to, for telehealth, actual televideo as opposed to telephone. So just additional comments that we're getting real-time information feedback from the schools and healthcare folks.
And this got brought up in the comments as well, and we talked about this previously as well, which is the asymmetrical versus symmetrical standards, and whether we need to start considering more symmetrical standards as we realize that even the up speeds are barely adequate to handle one or more simultaneous video feeds. So something else that we may want to consider in the course of this conversation.
So unless there are, maybe let's keep this open for another comment or two, but given that there's another section where we talk about the sort of future standards, I would humbly suggest that we potentially go to the next one, unless there's anything urgent that a council member has.
I just wanted a clarification. I'm not sure if it's in your, I think now with the executive order, it's a little inaccurate to use the CASF standard as a standard. So I would say that the standard is now what the executive order has mandated, which is at minimum 100 down. And that should be reflected here. And therefore the question is really about what's the symmetry. So are we going to make it 100 as our goal? We already have half of the formula. And really it's, since it is all about the upload now, my ability to share my face with you right now, what is that standard? And so I think it should be updated to at minimum reflect the EO, and really our challenge here is what to set the upload up.
I think with that, and then I want to make sure all the council members are also watching the chat as the publics are providing feedback on that as well. So maybe that's a good segue, Justin, if you want to scroll to the
data. Data is obviously foundational to good policymaking, good investment on behalf of the state. And we are relying on, data can both be overstated as a problem, and there's an infinite degree to which we can always search for better data. And so, this is obviously calibrated in that context. But we wanted to put this in the context of the state's new data strategy as well, and ensure that we're continuing to build the right data infrastructure to inform the policymaking that is going to be required over the long term. And when it comes to broadband, we want to acknowledge that we're missing some data today. And so we've articulated what those elements are at the current point in time, and highlighting a need. Obviously, we've got a lot of folks from the public, and I imagine from providers listening right now. And this is also an encouragement to say, help us solve this problem, right? Because we want to be able to provide, make better decisions as well. And so, but this is a place where we can just acknowledge some of the limitations of the status quo when it comes to data.
I'm sure Secretary Ross will remember a similar discussion that was had with groundwater wells. But one of the things that I think would be important to incorporate into this section is that this data is in the public interest and should be in the public's hands. And for many decades, we had a similar argument on groundwater wells. And the drought, brought forth the need for us to have groundwater management and to have complete transparency, not just for academia and research and us at the public regulatory side, but also the public at large, to really foster more comprehensive management. Much of this data exists today, but it is held in many of the carriers classify this as confidential data. And we need to make an explicit statewide council statement here that this is public information. It benefits the public. This data, this is in terms of action-oriented things that could be accomplished in a very timely way. It's with the, not simple, but simple recognition that this information is necessary for us across the public to have this information. So it's kind of like a big elephant in the room here, which is there's a lot of data that we could, share tomorrow if that were the case.
There's some public comments. I think was referring to this. I wanted to see if the council member can take a quick look.
This is Ann. I just have I see Bernie's comment there. And I don't know if these, have the studies been shared out? And if not, can they go in the chat so we can take a look at those?
All right. Aside from that, any other feedback on this? Okay, Justin, let's keep moving.
Okay, access. So this is an area where right now we have framed the problem and thrown potential ideas of where we might use a combination of triangulated data and anecdote to tell the story. And I think we should have a discussion about what the best possible information and way of doing that will be. But in rural areas, as an example, you know, at most, we're talking about 2/3 of rural Californian households that have broadband available. That likely overstates the case in terms of the actual availability within census blocks. And even within that, you know, to the extent that, you know, service is capped at a particular place and requires people to leave it in order for additional ads. And so the question here is, how, you know, what is the way that we want to tell this story? And then the other piece on the urban areas, obviously there's a lot that's built out in urban and suburban areas, but it is not equal across cities and across suburban areas. And that's particularly true in the context of, you know, both places that have been historically redlined, if we go back several decades, but also just across sort of socioeconomic variables and demographic variables. And so, you know, the question here again is, what is the information we want to use to help tell, to illustrate this point? And to the point, and to Bernie's comment, to the extent that there is data that is shareable, that we can use and leverage, we would like to do that. But we're going to have to go with whatever we have access to.
Well, I think this is obviously the one of the most important sections of laying out the problem that we see in California and throughout the country, but particularly in California, especially these urban pockets that have very, very poor service, depending on the side of the street that you live on even. And, you know, I would say that obviously we want to be helpful in filling this section out as much as possible, because in fact, most of the data that we have is carrier provided. Although we in California have been very fortunate to have a program that tests and verifies to kind of fill in these gaps. So we want to be helpful here in really showing the full picture.
This is Sarah, and I would just add one thing is that sorry if you can hear my dog in the background. Zoom calls are like the one time she loves squeaky toys. So the one thing I might suggest we look at, and I'm happy to like share some of the studies that I was looking at this past year, that Pew has done a few surveys of households with children who are trying to do distance learning during the pandemic, and they actually did the survey during the pandemic. I think one really big thing that has changed is that a lot of the surveys about consumer perspective on broadband, you know, the what they view as a barrier to broadband or why they don't have broadband, I think you will find that consumer perspective has changed as a result of the pandemic, because there were so many people before who might have said something like, I see the note about Pew said from a prior Pew study that, you know, their smartphone can do everything. I think more parents who've had that struggle with distance learning can now tell you that they would not share that view because their smartphone really can't do everything. And I think a lot of people have figured, you know, where they might have been cobbling together, if they were on a limited income, they can only pay for like one big telecom account in their household. They're going to pick, of course, the smartphone because you can take it anywhere. But if you're somebody, but a lot of, you know, the Pew studies that I've seen during that they've done during COVID has indicated that parents really don't think that, you know, relying solely on a smartphone when you can't also cobble together other resources like going to the library or going to Starbucks or going to some, you know, other public broadband access option, that the smartphone just isn't going to cut it for kids doing their homework on it. You can't really word process on it, even if you could do interactive video pretty easily. I've seen some of the distance learning stuff that kids in different school districts are doing, and I don't see how it would be feasible to do, you know, quite a lot of the homework that kids are getting assigned on a smartphone.
I'll just add, I think we could sort of very straightforwardly say that smartphones are not, on the device side, smartphones are not a substitute.
Yeah, and I didn't mean for that to be, by the way, a diatribe against smartphones. It was just more like, I'm happy to share the data about some of, that gives you a picture a little bit of how consumer perspective has changed. I think if you were to ask people during the COVID-19 pandemic, what's your number one barrier for not having broadband in your household, you're going to get pretty much either, I live in an area where it doesn't exist, or, you know, whatever does exist doesn't actually meet the threshold of being really broadband. And that's an infrastructure issue. And then on the other side, you have the affordability issue, where, you know, they've lost their job, or they have historically been lower income and they just can't afford a market rate plan, especially with the current economic downturn. And so I imagine that really you're dealing with kind of those two dueling banjos as your biggest two barriers. So the one thing I would just like for the access, I do strongly believe, based on some of the stuff that the FCC has done under the Obama administration and some of the research that's come out during the COVID-19 pandemic, that affordability really is, you know, a pretty significant barrier, and it's a function of access for many, many people.
Yeah, I saw Justin was scrolling down to there's an affordability section, but I'm hearing Sarah, maybe, you know, access and affordability needs to be more intertwined, because, you know, it's really the definition of access is not just a broadband, but the ability to utilize the broadband, which is affordability, as well as, you know, the device that you have available to you to make it work. So maybe we can, I mean, that could be
whether you want to put the, sorry, this is Sarah again, whether you want to put the affordability as like a subset under, you know, I'm not suggesting like completely rewrite things, just to say that I don't necessarily view affordability, and that historically the FCC under the Obama administration did not view affordability as a separate issue from access.
Yeah.
That it was a component of access because it was what was being cited as a major barrier to access.
Right. Okay.
All right. Any other comments on access?
Yep, just taking a look if there's any comments on the public. A lot going on there. Okay, sounds like probably similar things, that affordability being part of access barrier.
Yeah, and obviously there's an interplay. As I was scrolling and taking notes as you were talking, Sarah, there's obviously an interplay between affordability and access and adoption. These are, you know, it's obviously a core variable, both in the way that providers would think about their own builds, as well as in the actual behavior of Californians deciding whether or not to subscribe. Okay, so let's jump to adoption. The two places that we've currently focused here, one are, you know, the actual experience of under adoption within certain demographic groups across the state of California. And there might be better data that's available to help make this point. And also potentially better data to help illustrate the drivers, like the why behind the what. And then also around the devices question and the extent to which kids have, in particular families in the context of distance learning during the pandemic. That's been a piece of a lot of discussion, as well as a lot of work across the state. And Sarah, I added your comment around the survey of households with children under this section.
Thank you.
Of course.
I'm not sure if this is the section that it goes under, but one of the things I've been kind of struggling to fill in here is this obligation point. And it's good to kind of set a baseline of what we currently have, which is very limited on adoption and affordability in particular. But as an example, in California, when cable franchises were removed by statute under DFCA to go to a statewide franchising through the PUC process, there is a statute obligation on adoption threshold for I would say a very modest requirement for the cable companies to serve low-income customers in the state. And I think it's important to list it because I think it becomes clearer that our the limited obligations that we expect of our carriers. And we obviously have no such obligation. And this goes to, I think, Christina's earlier point, where the necessity of a federal administration to really create these obligations and to facilitate us at the state side to create them. And this is not just about funding infrastructure, especially when we're talking about adoption. This is about requiring people to serve and serve at an affordable rate. And so, many of our problems are infrastructure related, but a whole lot more are not infrastructure related, and they're about an obligation to serve and an obligation to serve at an affordable rate, and that largely not existing. And so that's missing here in terms of pointing out what's there's some, public health and safety requirements that are very limited, but the closest thing we have to any sort of lightweight obligation is DFCA, and just pointing it out so that people can see the gap more readily.
Sunny, I saw your comment in the chat around adoption goals. Did you want to voice that over?
I'm just saying that if we don't have a goal, we never achieve it. We need to set it. Pretty simple-minded here. There is the goal that the legislature did adopt. It was a hard-fought battle with all the stakeholders to get to at least. It doesn't say just at least 98% for deployment. In 2017, we strongly advocated with a whole network of 100 CBOs that we get to at least 90% adoption statewide by the same timeframe, which is 2022. That is possible if there is promotion of affordable offers or information out through all of the communication channels. We need better, improved, affordable offers from the ISP. So let me stipulate to that. That has enough speed and enough data that is affordable. Affordability is about then at $10, $15, $20 a month, not more than 20 for households, except for those who live in publicly subsidized housing. That is a whole different case that has to be addressed. Should be our goal to get all publicly subsidized housing also connected. There are about 300,000 housing units connected, multi-unit, publicly subsidized housing units in California. Probably 200,000 actually today have the right kind of connectivity. So that's a whole different issue. Commissioner Guzman-Aceves has tried to mightily work within the context of this statute to get the public housing account of CASF to actually be used. There's $10 million that's been sitting there for 3 years blocked because of what got inserted into AB 1665. And in terms of then going from a statewide adoption, because you have to have the three things that John Horrigan talks about when he was working for Pew, Cost has to be addressed, relevance has to be addressed, digital literacy has to be addressed. We also need money into the adoption account at CASF, but we need to also have a goal and accountability for those dollars of, I'll repeat it, 90% is doable by 2022. You have to have a big lift to get to 95% by 2025 because we keep reaching a more digitally disadvantaged population. But those kinds of goals are absolutely doable. And if anybody wants to make more aggressive goals and then the state be accountable for them, we would salute that.
I do want to recognize that Bernie is responding a lot to these comments. It's almost unfortunate he doesn't have a mic here just to have a fair discussion around this. I would say that I would really a question for the council here, but I think we have goals. I think we need obligations. You know, we have these plans, as you said, that exist. We have merger agreements where the companies commit to goals, as an example. And I think we're just past that point. We need to get to a point of obligation so that we don't have, and I saw some of this further down in the narrative, which we'll get to, but we're not putting the burden on the customer as the customer having the problem here, but we're putting it, you know, the obligation, you know, it's kind of, I don't know what to compare it to. It's like we have these notions that customers have to figure it all out on their own, knowing very well what happens in this space in terms of people calling to get an affordable plan and all the dilemmas that are occurring with that. So I think we're past that. I would say we need to create obligations, and I think just as an example at a state side that you know, DIVCA is a way to go because we have cable companies that could theoretically serve all communities, and they could provide affordable plans that they are offering, but they could actually meet a requirement at a community level, not at the statewide level that DIVCA has that is really allowing for continuous redlining.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we make sure when we open up for the public comment, folks that have been, you know, chatting have the opportunity to speak up. We want to make sure we allot enough time for this particular section because obviously I can see a lot of activity people are passionate about. But let's go ahead and finish the rest so the entire context of the document can be presented, and then we'll come back to honing in on this a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Amy. And I do think here on adoption as well, you know, obviously we haven't highlighted the breadth of the potential sources of insight that we might want to use as we tell this story. And so I would encourage both council members as well as members of the public, if you have other places where you think other studies or elements that you think would be useful to inform this section, please do share. All right, affordability is next. This one's relatively simple because we don't have fantastic data today, although I would love to be wrong on that and someone has a perfect data set that they're willing to share that we can use. But part of the real question here is that affordability is obviously borne out in a lot of the survey data as one of the key barriers to adoption. And so it's obviously, especially taking Commissioner Guzman-Aceves' frame as an obligation or as a right, affordability becomes a really important piece of the puzzle in terms of what we're trying to address, and really understanding affordability in the context of the household budget of a family that is thinking about whether or not to subscribe to broadband. perhaps I did not tee that up well. But if anyone has comments on either how you want to frame this, additional sources of insight, or if you fully agree, feel free to say nothing and we can jump to reliability.
Maybe we can, unless somebody feels, I think we can go to reliability, because when in discussing the access, affordability came up, and I think there were feedback that was provided there as well.
Great. So reliability, the central piece here is, as it said in the name, given the increasing, either we think of broadband as a utility or as a right for Californians, we need to make sure that it's reliable, that people can rely on it and when they need it. And so the question is, what are the, how do we think about the reliability of this infrastructure today, both in terms of the sort of the network itself, but also the reliability and the experience of an individual Californian or a business or a community, and how they, what is their actual reliability experience with broadband today, especially as we've gone through a set of crises in the last couple of years.
Well, good morning. This is Pat Mellon from OES. Can you hear me? Okay, this issue of reliability and redundancy, I mean, clearly the redundancy could include, fiber loops, so that if we lose one portion of the fiber through some kind of a backhoe digging through it or some kind of a fire, taking down an overhead line, as long as there's a loop around, there's still, still connectivity. The other issue that we have found, particularly with the new Senate Bill 670 reporting by the 911 system providers, is we found that particularly during the PSPS events, that and really from a broader sense, the reliability of VoIP connections, which is basically broadband, is really troubling. So I think there needs to be some encouragement of hardening of the services, so that there's a backup power, so that if there is a PSPS event, public safety power shutoff event, the system can survive. Because the cellular carriers have actually done a pretty decent job of moving forward with hardening their sites by putting in some battery backup. The broadband services have not. So when there is a PSPS event, OES is constantly getting advised that that the VoIP systems and the ability of those people using VoIP to access 911 are going down. So we do need to improve the reliability of the systems in the form of resiliency, as well as the redundancy. So when there is a section of fiber that goes down, that there is another path in.
Thank you, Pat. That's very helpful.
I would just reiterate what Pat has said, and I can't help but kind of maybe bring it back to the original vision, which is that when when Trump's FCC called the internet an information service, all of these protections that are under a definition of a telecommunication service, all these communication services, traditionally, the voice service still continues to have this reliability requirement, has the affordability requirement, has the obligation to serve requirement. And so I think part of the vision should be to not continue to play into this fallacy that just because it's a different type of infrastructure of hardware, it is not a telecommunication service. And this is, we have gone backward in our safety net for communication services because of Chairman Pai's decision to call this an information service. And it really doesn't matter what we call it, it's what the obligations are around it. And so because the obligations are tied to the definition, we need to call this a telecommunication service so that we can have those same reliability provisions that we've had with voice, the same affordability provisions that we've had with voice, the same obligation for every Californian to have service that we have with voice. And this, the emergency situations always bring it home that we're just playing this charade around the laws and regulatory structure with this communication service.
This is Pat again. I could not agree with the commissioner more.
All right, I see a lot of nodding heads. Let's jump to the next section, digital literacy and skills, which is currently a placeholder title. And so I'd love to open it up a little bit to just talk about how we'd want to frame the current state today. And I imagine, Sunny, you might have some strong perspectives and experience here, given the work that CETF has done on these issues.
Well, we do, but I think actually Jeff is going to address this in terms of adoption. So Justin, do you want to go to that? I was actually still listening to what Commissioner Guzman-Aceves said and Patrick, and actually wanting to invite the conversation to actually explicitly address the charade and why it does happen. So I actually think that would be a good conversation at some point. You know, let me just say quickly, digital literacy is an essential part of adoption. It's one of the three major pillars or stools of the legs of the stool. And digital literacy is a very good thing to be provided through the education school-based strategies. However, only a third of low-income households and only a third of people who are digitally disadvantaged have children in school in California. So we need other ways to reach seniors, people who are experiencing homelessness, people who are maybe on general assistance, the seniors in particular are often not connected, but want to be connected when they realize that they can rely on telehealth to remain in their homes. So we need all of the state agencies who can reach these populations, and all of the counties and human services agencies to be a part of the effort for digital literacy.
Thank you, Sunny. Jerry, did you want to jump in on that?
I'm going to leave that to Jeff when he gets on in a few minutes.
Okay.
All right, let's keep moving.
Okay. California's current investment approach and funding. So I'm not sure that this requires too much by way of conversation, but we have to do a little bit of work to be able to pull together this data, just in terms of our what's our historical investment been in broadband statewide, ideally broken down across some of the categories, getting a sense of the return on that investment, and some of the performance of the underlying elements of the way that we invest today. Open to, if there are perspectives that the council members believe we should be adding into this, we'll open that up. But otherwise, it's just, this is a placeholder and we need to do some work.
I just have one small but significant thing here is that, and this again goes back to this fallacy that's been created around whether this is a telecommunication or information service thing. And that is that the funding of our public purpose programs is funded by the voice component of a customer service. And for those households that are voice only, and those tend to be, elderly, low income, rural, who only have voice, they're paying a much larger portion of their bill towards the public purpose programs. What we need to do is what we did with the 911 reform, and have each customer contribute to the public purpose programs, regardless of how much that customer is texting or calling. And that's a major reform that we need in terms of our investment approach, and we need more transparency, particularly for the public and the legislature, to understand the regressive structure that currently exists on customers that have the poorest infrastructure. And so there is a continued decline, obviously, in the voice service, and we don't want to be in the position of fighting for old technology. Let's fund the new technology, and let's put an appropriate surcharge that is more equitable and not regressive on elderly and rural customers.
Thank you. Okay, the next section is on our current approach as a state. And so I imagine this is going to be a description of the both the CPUC's actions in this area, as well as the other pieces, the other instruments of the state that we have represented on this call. And just providing a sense of what are the basic roles and responsibilities of the way that we do this work today, and what are some of those limitations about our current organization and execution.
Justin, this is broader than, I mean, these are, this has sort of some funding and policy, but then there's also kind of policy that's outside of this, right? Like, as an example, right, there are the regional consortia and the work that they do. CTF as a private nonprofit, but also, you know, a critical player, right? Not .gov at the end, but as important as all of the .govs involved. So I'm wondering if this is maybe a description that's a little broader. I'd add scenic in there as the high-speed broadband connection to, CENIC to all the education entities, including libraries. But just thinking about everyone who sort of plays a role in the sort of, maybe, I guess it's right, the non-private company provision of broadband and adoption.
Great.
Hey, Justin, while you are wrapping, I know we're almost get to the section of what this 2020 Exposed to challenge. I want to do a time check because this meeting is scheduled, this council meeting is scheduled to 11:30, and I want to make sure we have a good half an hour open up for public comments. So we have a few more minutes to see either we wrap up a section or we want to.
Why don't we do this, given that we only have, if we stick to that timeline, we'd only have 7 minutes. I would love to go to actions, because obviously that is the, that is the thrust of what we're trying to get to, is to actually do something. And so maybe we can jump down there, and what we can do is take a couple of minutes for just open to the entire council about some of the big things that we want to put on the table. And I will take notes that are, sort of agnostic of section. That way we're encouraging a conversation at the right level. Does that work? All right.
Yep. Okay, so sorry, I was trying to read there. There's quite a bit of action. I know our public's jumping a bit, and so we will get to you in about 6 minutes. I'm going to open up, and then in terms of the action, let me look at who is on that. Or maybe we'll just open up to see if there's any council member who want to dive in. I don't think there was any specific pair, unless was there a particular pair assigned to this? No, right? Okay. Okay. Just to state what you need.
So let me then go over a couple of high-level things and see if I can provoke a reaction and get some discussion. Cross-cutting themes here, getting better data and figuring out what the requirement is to gather that data as a state, restructuring the governance of our broadband organization, doing better collaboration with local governments to facilitate cross-jurisdictional learning, and making some of the case for broadband. And so a little bit of the modeling of what's the size of the prize if we were to be able to achieve our broadband vision. In the deployment actions, some of the within 18 months things that we've heard wanting to be put on the table are looking at some of the existing funding instruments that we have to see if we can enable incremental broadband deployment in specific arenas. And so that includes things like water infrastructure areas, in terms of our transportation, in terms of finishing last mile into schools, things like reviewing and proposing revisions to our existing broadband funding programs, including exploring things like a bond issuance, maximizing deployment in right-of-way, some questions around the right policies that we might want to put out to be able to encourage deployment. I saw a little bit in the chat, and we've heard during some of our listening sessions around, particularly driving better certainty around the timeframes associated with permitting as a piece where I know that there was a lot of interest on the provider side. So I'll pause there. Hopefully there's enough in there to generate some thoughts from the council members.
Yes, thank you. I just, I didn't jump in before you started talking because I had to get my notes from when I went over this. In the Dig Smart bullet point, under within 18 months, this concept of all major infrastructure development projects is an undefined term. You could say that anything like building or redoing a road is a major infrastructure development project. And perhaps the trenching is in the middle of the road. We're not going to lay broadband in the middle of a state highway. So I think that needs to be thought through a little bit more. And I would also ask to add an adjusting based on appropriateness as well as feasibility, because in the example I just gave, it is feasible to lay fiber in the middle of a road, but it's not appropriate. It doesn't, it will not be a sustainable solution. So anywhere where cars drive on top of where broadband might be is something that we would strongly advise against. And so we just want to be very careful. While the concept is good and should be considered, we need to make sure that we're doing it in a way where the solution isn't a short-lived solution.
That's good. Thank you, Laurie, for that. Any others?
This is Martha. I don't know if this falls within which time frame, but I think that something that I think Matt raised earlier in the comments is that there is a fair amount of capacity out there. We have horrible stories that come before us where there's fiber going through communities and no service. And there needs to be an empowerment of someone to force the leasing of available capacity at a non-discriminatory rate, of an affordable rate, essentially, whatever we want to call it, a wholesale rate, non not hijacking, right? That is like a low hanging fruit where we need a facilitator between those that need that service and those that have that existing capacity, but for whatever business reasons don't want to provide it. There needs to be, again, an obligation to do that. And that's not going to solve every problem, but it is a problem out there that needs that. And it's not just facilitation, but obligation.
Okay. Any other comment? Justin, I want to make sure you wrap up this section before we open up. And if we don't have as many speakers, we can always come back after, after that. And yes, the comments that are in the chat room, we are gonna take those into account, but I'm sure that folks want to speak to add more context to the chat. So I'm teeing that up, and if you like to speak, please make sure you go ahead and put in the chat that so we can start calling folks to speak. So Justin, just one more minute on this. If anything else you want to ask, Toon.
No, there's a lot of content here that we didn't get to cover in the confines of the time that we've had available today. Obviously, everyone has an electronic copy of this document, and we're going to need to continue building this out over the coming days and weeks. And so if there are big comments that you have in terms of areas that you want to see considered or included that are outside of your section, please do share that back with Stephanie, and we'll make sure that they are incorporated.
All right. Thank you for that. Any other last comment from the council member on this before we open up to the public? All right. Hearing none. So I wanted to go back a little bit. I know there was just looking at the chat activity, there's a bunch of chat when we were talking about the affordability, accessibility. So I don't know if Justin, if you can scroll back to that, if that's what people wanted to talk through, or we could, I'm looking at the request of speak coming in now, and let me look. Actually, do we have folks that are requesting to speak? Joe, do we have any public requests to speak at this moment?
So I'm going to defer to Catherine with that. I don't think so. I do want to point out that those who have submitted written public comment, they are posted on the website, and I will put the, it's at the bottom of the page, and I just posted that, and Stephanie already posted the email address to send public comments in. And just a reminder that the last day for public comments is noon on Friday, November 20th, Pacific Standard Time. So to make sure everything can be considered beforehand.
All right. I am still not seeing any request for public comments. I mean, if there's none, we could go back and continue editing this, but I want to give one more chance that if anybody wants to speak, please make sure. Oh. Okay, I think there is one. Let's start with, was it Rochelle Croncastle? If you could go ahead and have your camera on, go ahead and announce yourself, and then you have 2 minutes.
Hi, thank you. Rochelle Swanson from Crown Castle. We submitted a new additional comments last night. Just wanted to bring that to your attention. And again, thank all of you for all the work you're putting in. It's really quite amazing to see the progress that you're making, and it's really appreciated. And I think that I can speak not just for our own company, but all the companies that are working to do broadband deployment. I just wanted to, reaffirm that one of the best first steps that could be taken is to really reform around deployment and help us be able to take the projects we already have in the pipeline and get them deployed so that we can start bringing more community members online. We submitted some specifics around some permitting that can be done. I also wanted to share, live comment today to also reiterate that, the goals that we have here is not about not supporting locals. And, I think we've mentioned before that there are challenges even in the pandemic. And, would also hope that members would look at that as what needs to be done to maybe support those cities as well, so that they can meet timelines that helps us move forward so that we can get projects done in months instead of not years. And as always, available to have meetings and give some specific examples and also some ideas. So thank you again for considering all that we've put forward, and continue to really be heartened by this process and very honored to be a part of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle, for that. And I'm looking at, looks like next individual request to speak is Ernesto Falcon. If you can go ahead and re-announce yourself, and you have 2 minutes. Have your screen on, please.
Great, thank you. Ernesto Falcon with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. This is a great meeting. I really appreciate all the hard work everyone's doing. Something that was said early on about kind of assessing where we are in metrics. I think that's the right approach, because there are kind of short-term interim steps you can take. There are kind of medium-term, and then there's the long-term. And I would just make the suggestion that generally when I hear from industry of starting from scratch to building out to completion, probably up to 5 years. And so maybe that's the long-term number you should consider as you assess. And I think the 6-month and I think 18-month intervals also make a lot of sense. Mostly because some of the things you want to solve in this effort cannot be solved in 6 months, right? They will take actual laying of infrastructure to resolve. And then the other thing I want to suggest in terms of the data and collecting information is pricing. And kind of getting an understanding of kind of what different communities are paying for the services in terms of what's being offered. And there's a other piece of pricing data that I think is worthwhile when we think about the infrastructure investments, and that's the cost of maintaining the network when it's built. I'm digging into this in my own personal capacity, but one of the interesting things I've heard is some networks take 1 technician for every 500 people to sustain, and some networks take 1 technician for every 5,000 people, right? And that's a massive difference of your operations and maintenance costs, which will implicate the price that they could sell services, which will implicate how much subsidies you would need to really make progress on the affordability piece. So thank you everyone for your time, and I just want to make those suggestions and really praise this process. It's looking fantastic.
Thank you for that, Ernesto. And as you can see, the comments are being captured, by the way, anybody that wanted to speak. So thank you, Justin. You're doing awesome job. All right. I don't believe I've seen any other. Catherine or Joe, are there any other individuals in the queue?
Yes, Jeffrey Tarda, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce your hand. Feel free to unmute yourself and put yourself on camera.
Okay, I'll try the camera because I'm also was just talking with Tamara in the governor's office. So I've stopped that one so I can talk with you. And again, I will reiterate, you've had for more than 5 years the SuperNet down in UC San Diego. Can you learn some of the tools from them that will help us regain and get a better sense of speed and a better sense of initiative? 40 years ago, I started working with the encryption and the IEEE on these subjects and in what we needed to do. I worked with the Congresswoman and I worked with other individuals. I'm glad this is coming, and I spoke to Dr. Galway years ago, and you're trying to do what the Master Plan on Aging, 35 people spent, and they took 1.5 years, and you're trying to do this right now in less than 6 months to get started. I will offer you, not good luck, but like them, there's so many things that were left out. I hope to participate further on there, but will encourage that the higher speed you can get and, identify your policy. But, if you go out to providers right now, they say unlimited, and yet they mean 33 gigabytes. I use that, obviously, more than that, in these Zoom meetings every single month. And I just supposed to be in a 5G network here in Sacramento, and I'm very lucky if I get more than 3 most of the time. And it will break up and chop up and everything else. And I speak to the new concern is with Zoom going to end-to-end encryption, you're going to find it far more difficult. I was just on the call right now, another Zoom call, and we lost the sound quality. This is things that are factors that I don't see when you're talking about internet, is what's the floor basis that you're trying to strive for? Because you need to be sure you've got a minimum standard as you're trying to strive for whatever the maximum standard is that will provide the throughput that you need. And as you've spoken before, that when you get into single house, they're no longer one person on. There is now, with this long distance learning for schools, multiple. You know, I mean, one of the best things I think would hopefully come out of you is that maybe you lay a couple of long fiber optic cables from San Diego all the way up here to Sacramento so that you have, you know, a reliable, dependable broadband service that you can depend on. Because right now, that's a question. And I'll end.
All right, thank you for that, Jeff. And looking at the folks that are raising hand, looks like actually Sunny. Sunny, did you want to make a comment or?
After the public comments.
Okay, after the public comment. Thank you. Any other public speakers? Jewel and Catherine?
Right now, I'm just seeing Sunny's hand.
Same.
So what I wanted to comment on as Rochelle was speaking about the process is to just share how much I think that the process around the executive order and the action plan is getting everybody excited. Valley Vision started before the executive order, but is updating model policies and ordinances that local governments can use. And in Southern California, the Southern California Association of Governments and the San Diego Council of Governments, so SCAG and SANDAG, are joining forces, and they together have 7 counties and over 190 cities, are all passing resolutions about how to streamline permitting. Hopefully they want to consolidate permitting, standardize permit costs, and really cut down on the time to construction. So we should salute them and just recognize how much synergy is actually coming out of this whole action plan process.
All right, thank you for that, Sunny. As I see there's no other public speaker, I do want to take a minute to acknowledge, I think I was looking at the attendee list. I saw at least 3, the Broadband Council advisory member, Joy, Robert, and Matthew are on this call with us. So I appreciate our council advisory members who continue to participate in this process. And maybe with that, with the remaining 15 minutes, if again, last chance, if there's any more public comments. If not, wanted to pivot back to the council member to open it up to council member to see, first of all, any suggestion, any recommendation on the next focus. What is it that you need between now and November 18th, the next public meeting, to continue to make progress? And also, Stephanie, I think you have all those dates that you lay out, that we do have those continual working sessions that are available for the public as well as the council member to utilize. So let me open it up to the council members. Are you all good with this process? Do you need any further support or any, maybe I'll call up any of the particular pairs might be interested to have, utilize one of those, pre-scheduled sessions if you want your session to have more members to participate. So maybe I'll just quickly going through, not to put you on the spot, you can always say, I'm good, move on. That's okay, I'll leave you alone. So I think talked ad nauseum on the vision part. I think maybe okay there, right? Sunny and Sarah?
I'm good. This is Sarah.
Yep. Okay. And the COVID impact, that was an area that CDFA, so between Secretary Ross and Arturo and the OES, are you guys good with the resource that you have, the approach that you're taking?
This is Pat. I believe that Arturo was waiting for some information from Department of Education on some statistics.
Yeah. Got it. We'll make note of that. Our staff will make sure. And then on the current state, that was between Dr. Williams and Ann.
I think we're pretty good. I think we talked about earlier, there's a lot of the, probably what we'll be doing is a lot of the information that goes into is in some of the more detailed sections below, then we'll be able to summarize up in current state. So we'll just keep plugging along there. I don't know if Dr. Williams has anything to add on that.
Nope, hearing none. All right, and then achieving the vision, Christina, I think it's you and I. Do you have any, are you good with potentially where we're going?
Amy, Christina had a drop and I will check in with her early next week.
Got it. All right. And then on modeling mapping data, that's Martha and Patrick. CPUC and OES.
I think we're good, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think we're good too. I think, my comments regarding the reliability and resiliency is essential in this. I know that some of the coverage modeling that CPUC does is really important in identifying those areas where there's little or no coverage.
Okay. Technology sufficiency, that's with DGS and CETF, so that's Brent and Sunny. That's good.
I think we're fine. And I keep submitting that as others tell us about last mile, first mile, household level of speeds. Well, I'm just providing that to Stephanie and to Brent.
Yeah, and that's much appreciated. I agree. I think we've got a really good framework to work with.
Awesome. All right, deployment, that's back to Martha and Lori. Kelsta, that's good.
Yeah, I think we're good. We have ongoing conversations, and I think we're kind of building out, not just what we want to include in this version, but also where are the opportunities for work for, the future beyond this action plan.
Lori, you should report on what Caltrans did, what you and Caltrans did with a huge workshop.
Sure. So we held our second workshop with the ISPs in early October. I believe it was October 8th. I think the virtual format actually worked in our favor because we had in a January meeting, we had about 45 participants. And in this one, we had 120. So I think we had I was very impressed with the thoughtfulness of the comments, and it gave us a lot to think about. And we have tried to consider it not just for, Caltrans use, but also for how do we work it into our work here on the council and in the action plan and in the rest of the EO orders as well. So thank you. I'm sure many of you who are on this meeting were also on in that meeting. And I think we look forward to continuing to do those twice a year.
Excellent. That's great to hear. Thank you for that, Lori. All right, and then the final section, it was on the adoption, and that's between Sunny and CDE. So I know, Jeff, you're standing in for, yep. Are you guys good? Okay. All right. Stephanie, correct. I don't know what happened to my voice, so I apologize. It just went weird on me. Maybe Stephanie can, or Justin. Oh my God, I can't speak right now. Stephanie or Justin, one of you jump in, because I do believe the CDC also held a session with a ISP, so an obtain feedback. Was that right? Stephanie, go ahead and just
there we go. Sorry about that. Looking for mute. Yes, we also held, of course, a session with the providers. And actually, Lori and I were working very closely, understanding that they were going to have these two simultaneous sessions, of course, but the topics were very different. But still, it's really reinforcing and supporting the partnership and relationship, of course, with providers, either around Caltrans's efforts or, of course, for broadband. So we did hold a session with specifically providers. We had about 51 attendees. It was very well attended. I agree with Lori. I think for the fact that we did have the session online, although it's dependent on high-speed internet, we had a very good attendance with this session. And we appreciated the candid feedback. And I think what was helpful is we were able to capture key content. We were able to also really hone in on areas, of course, that we've heard and that we've talked about before, but it emphasized the need around areas of barriers that we need to remove, around areas that we need to partner better. So we've captured that. We've actually succinctly put them in a list of recommended actions, which Justin, of course, mentioned earlier. And we are going to consider that heavily as we go on to the next steps in the final draft of the action plan.
All right. Thank you for that. Justin, last word on this. Maybe we can wrap up early and give a few minutes back to everybody to stay. Justin, do you have pretty much what you need to capture on the facilitation role?
Yeah, thank you everyone for the spirited discussion, both from the council members, but also from the public in the chat. And as I believe Stephanie mentioned in the chat, we are using all of that as public comment, and we'll be incorporating that into the work of this council going forward. So thank you all.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Once again, all the council member, I know this is very, very, a lot of work on top of what you already have. And also all the public participants, thank you very much for all the great suggestions. There are many additional community-driven listening session, as well as work session, if anybody decide to use it. And please do continue to follow the progress of this over the website, as all of these are being presented. We very much appreciate the public engagement on this, and very excited on where we're getting into. And again, the goal is on November 18th, 80% of this document should be ready. We gotta, like Sunny, right? We gotta get ourselves a goal and marching towards it. So with that said, you got 8 minutes back to your day. Thank you once again. Great to see you all, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.